talk about Gilgamesh. How'd the second half of this go for you? What'd you think?
The first half of the second half was okay, but the second half of the second half was a little bit harder to understand.
Okay. All right. So let's start there then. What was easy about the first half? What did you get from the first half of the second half? To put it in those terms.
I guess just maybe the story was more interesting. It wasn't as much like a history as it was like an actual story.
Yeah, the first half of this portion is more action-oriented, right? And up to about, say, tablet 8-ish, right? Like really up until Enkidu's death, the epic is really action-oriented, right? Gilgamesh did this, and then he did this, and then he did this, and then he did this. And then the end of the epic becomes a lot more about certain metaphysical questions that have been lurking in the narrative as a whole, but really don't come to the fore until the end, right? So let's talk about this first half of the second half. Right? What's the order of events here? What happens?
Ishtar likes Gilgamesh.
Okay, yes. Ishtar propositions Gilgamesh. And it is a pretty explicitly sexually framed proposition, right? If we look on page 124, right, the princess Ishtar coveted Gilgamesh's beauty. Come, Gilgamesh, you shall be my bridegroom. Give me of your lusciousness. You shall be my husband, and I shall be your wife. I will ready for you a chariot of lapis and gold, with golden wheels and fittings of gemstones. You shall harness storm demons as if they were giant mules. Enter our house amidst fragrance of cedar. When you enter our house, the splendid exotic doorsill shall do you homage. Kings, nobles, and princes shall kneel before you. They shall bring you gifts of mountain and lowland as tribute. Your goats shall bear triplets, your ewes twins. Your pack-laden donkey shall overtake the mule. Your horses shall run proud before the wagon. Your ox in the yoke shall have none to compare. This sounds pretty good, right? This is a pretty solid proposal. Gilgamesh stands to gain an awful lot from this, yeah? So it would seem. Now, the important thing that's going on here, right, has to do with certain ancient world concepts of the relationship between a deity and a particular city-state. Right? If we go back to the very beginning of the epic, if we go back to the that very beginning of Tablet 1, where it's kind of giving us what's going to happen in the whole epic in a thumbnail sketch, right? If we look on page 100, right? Approach Eanna, the dwelling of Ishtar, which no future king, no human being will equal. So there's a major temple to Ishtar. Ishtar's major temple is in Gilgamesh's city, is in the city of Uruk. And each god had their major temple, their sort of home temple, in a different city. Right? Shamash, the sun god, had his temple in Larsa, and Lil, the storm god, had his temple in Nippur, and so on and so forth, right? So Ishtar is the goddess of Gilgamesh's city, right? What we'd call the sovereignty goddess. And if we look at the things that she promises to Gilgamesh, are these all things that only benefit Gilgamesh?
No. It would benefit her as well.
Would they just benefit her and him?
No, the whole city.
Yeah, a lot of, if the goats are bearing triplets, right? That's good for everybody. If your oxen will have none to compare in the plow, right? That's good for everybody. Now, what do we remember about what the king's primary function was in a Mesopotamian city? What was he supposed to ensure?
The people's survival, which this would do.
Yeah, not just survival, their defense, right? And also fertility. The fertility of the people and the fertility of the land. So through those sort of symbolic sacred marriages, like the one Enkidu interrupts at the beginning of the epic, right, that's how Gilgamesh is supposed to ensure the fertility of the people. He's also supposed to oversee farming and irrigation projects. Right? That's an important part of the king's role, ensuring the fertility of the land. So this is something that would do both of those things, right? You marry the sovereignty goddess, and everybody gets what they want. And Uruk becomes a wonderful place.
Except she's a black widow.
Yeah, she's got a history, right? She's got a past that he then throws back in her face, right?
Which could also then not be good for the people, because if their king dies because their queen killed him, then, that doesn't always.
Yeah, but these people
Mhm.
aren't people she buried. I mean, not
Well.
that that makes it too much better, but I mean, like, when,
Mm-hmm.
the difference to me is,
Mhm.
like, when, kind of like the difference between a whore and like an actual wife. Like, this is something where they're gonna build a household
Bless you.
together, in theory. So it's
Mhm.
mutually beneficial.
Yeah, the goddess of the city marries the king of the city,
Right. Whereas some of these other things
which he's
aren't.
already been doing symbolically in these rituals, right? So, yeah, so here's the thing though. Does Gilgamesh, when he rejects Ishtar, give a single thought to what will happen to his people if he does so?
No.
It's exactly, it's entirely about what the likely outcome is for him, right? He doesn't care if the goats and ewes will be bearing triplets, if he himself won't be around to enjoy it for long. Right? If we look on page 124, Gilgamesh's response, right? Gilgamesh made ready to speak, saying to the princess Ishtar, "What shall I give you if I take you to wife? Shall I give you a headdress for your person or clothing? Shall I give you bread or drink? Shall I give you food worthy of divinity? Shall I give you drink worthy of queenship?" What's interesting about these gifts he pretends to offer? Okay, well, actually, does she even need them, right? She's a goddess. Look again at the things he's offering her. Clothes, bread and drink.
Same thing with turning into human.
Exactly, yeah. These are attributes of humanity. And he's offering them to a goddess. You say, like, I don't have anything to, what do I have to give you? You're a goddess, right? The gifts that I give you are fit, that I would give you are fit for a human. Okay, so a little bit of humility there at the beginning, right? But we know that Gilgamesh can't maintain that pose for very long, because Gilgamesh is an asshole. So he continues, "You are a brazier that goes out when it freezes, a flimsy door that keeps out neither wind nor draught, a palace that crushes a warrior, a mouse that gnaws through its housing, tar that smears its bearer, water skin that soaks its bearer, weak stone that undermines a wall, battering ram that destroys the wall for an enemy, shoe that pinches its wearer." Right? This guy just doesn't know when to stop. So, Ishtar, in Gilgamesh's formulation, is herself, right, a gift that always, that always bites back, right? Right? A gift that harms more than it helps, that always undermines its own intended purpose. So, he rejects her advances, and then what's the outcome?
She wants to call down the bull.
Yes. Summon the bull of heaven.
And isn't it like Anu was the one who commanded, I can't even say his name,
Mm-hmm.
but that's also her father?
Yeah. Anu is the Babylonian sky god. Right? And because the sky just sort of sits over the earth and interacts with it not at all, Anu is usually aloof from human affairs, right? Anu doesn't usually meddle in the affairs of human beings. The storm god Enlil is usually much more both beneficial and dangerous to humans. And this is another thing to remember about the ancient world relationship with the gods, right? Gods are by and large embodiments of powerful natural forces or of powerful concepts. And so the form of worship was usually, right, propitiating them, right? Not so much, it wasn't so much done out of love as, it's like, Yeah, please leave us alone, right? And Lil, we will give you this offering of corn, or these freshly slaughtered bullocks or whatever, right? So that you stay the hell away from us and don't flood our cities. Right, so the gods are capricious. They're difficult to deal with, and people generally sort of bribe the gods to keep them away. That's the usual human relationship with gods in this particular time period, in this particular culture.
I mean, it just seems like he's not batting very well.
Pardon?
It seems like Anu is not batting very well.
Yeah, well, he basically lets his daughter do as she pleases, right?
Right.
Provided she allows the people to gather food for 7 years. Because what is the bull of heaven going to do? What is it going to cause? Not just mayhem and destruction, right? But drought and famine. Right, if we look at page 126, when the bull is released, when it reached Uruk, it dried up the groves, reed beds, and marshes. It went down to the river. It lowered the river by 7 cubits. At the bull's snort, a pit opened up. 100 young men of Uruk fell into it. At a second snort, a pit opened up. 200 young men of Uruk fell into it. At his third snort, a pit opened up, and Ketu fell into it up to his middle. So the important thing to note here is that, this is causing a loss of fertility in the land, right? Gilgamesh's irresponsibility has led to the gods punishing his city with a horrible drought caused by the bull. Now, what is the epithet, the little nickname that's often attached to Gilgamesh? What is he often called and referred to as?
The shepherd?
Well, that's the sort of generic epithet for a king, right? A Mesopotamian king is supposed to be shepherd to his people.
Isn't he sometimes called the wild bull?
Exactly, yes. Thank you, Kelly. Yes, he is the wild bull of Uruk. So this destructive bull of heaven is a kind of analog of Gilgamesh, right? Gilgamesh is also a destructive force. And his carelessness and his concern for himself and for his own life is what leads to the bull of heaven coming down and ravaging his city, right? So we can sort of chalk up one more notch on Gilgamesh's list of shitty actions as king, right? This guy's really, really bad at ruling. So then what happens to the bull? Yeah, Jessica.
Well, I don't get it. So if he didn't really do anything wrong, and you said Anu is supposed to be over humanity and everything has value for him, why did he just let his daughter go off and kill all these people?
Well, he didn't do anything wrong from our perspective, right?
Well, I mean, and
From the
you see from Anu as well, he says, but you provoked me.
Yeah.
So he sees that he didn't do anything wrong. So I still don't get why she's just handed it and she can go off and kill all these people.
Look here, basically because the way this culture conceives deities, right? Gods can pretty much do it. It is enormous cheek. It is enormously disrespectful for a human being to speak that way to a god. And the gods are capricious and destructive. I mean, that's basically how they behave. If you don't give them what they want, they wreck things. And Gilgamesh is supposed to be protecting his people from these kinds of forces, right? He's supposed to be the chief priest, keeping the gods happy. He's supposed to be overseeing irrigation projects, making sure the land is fertile. He's supposed to be, sleeping with the sacred prostitutes and making sure that the people are fertile, right? These are the things he's supposed to be doing as king. And while he maybe doesn't do anything specifically wrong, he's not doing the right thing here either. Right? The right thing for his city would be for him to marry the goddess of the city and reap the benefits of that, even if it shortens his own life.
But does it not show that he's a good king by standing up for what he wants and what he believes in? And then, like, he saves them from the bull with Enkidu. So, I mean, technically, like, everything's still okay.
But what's the point of killing the bull, though? What does he then do?
Gains fame and glory.
He gets more fame and glory, right? And he
But-
keeps the horns as a trophy.
Wait a second. It dried up the groves, the reed beds, and marshes. It's not like that's just gonna grow back instantly.
No.
So I mean, like, yeah, they killed him, but
This-
there is harm done.
Yeah, this has done lasting damage. Yeah.
And then apparently pits that just.
Yeah. Yep. Just pits opening up wherever, right? Yeah, lowering the river by 7. That's very, very, very significant. Right? The Mesopotamian civilization was basically dependent on the two rivers that flowed around it, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And it was the flooding of those rivers that kept this particular land fertile in the midst of what is otherwise desert. So if these rivers get low, right, this is a serious problem, this is a serious issue. And it's caused by Gilgamesh's pride and his talking back to a goddess.
But I mean,
Right.
he's 2/3.
Yeah. But that 1/3 matters, right?
Does it matter that much, though?
Well-
that's what I'm wondering.
Well, is being a demigod, is being 2/3 a god enough to make you a god? That's part of the point of that second half of the epic, right? Gilgamesh isn't a god. He's not one of the immortals. This part of him that is mortal means that he is going to go the way of all mortals, and there's nothing he can really do about it. Right?
But like, doesn't he? I don't.
And hearing that from the tavern keeper isn't good enough for him
Mhm.
still. He still has to go on another journey to find the right answers.
Yeah. Right. He's really, really brave and really, really full of himself until he actually sees death up close for the first time, right? And not, a death he didn't directly cause. By, say, chopping off a monster's head, whatever, right? What does he actually watch happening as Enkidu is dying? Yeah. He watches Enkidu's body decompose, right? He sits there and looks at his friend and watches and waits until a worm falls out of the nose. He keeps repeating this over and over again. He's eager to tell this to anyone he meets. But yeah, he has watched his friend decay. He has watched his friend's body literally fall apart. And this is what has put woe into his vitals, right? The idea that, shit, this is going to happen to me too. I am going to die unless I do something about it. Now, what was his attitude towards death before? What was his attitude towards death, for example, when he went to go fight Humbaba, or when he battled the Bull of Heaven?
I don't think
Wasn't worried about it.
Yeah, he didn't have an attitude towards it. It was like,
Yeah.
let me go do this and worry
If
about
he
it
died,
later.
he'd still be glorious because he died fighting the great monster of the woods or the
Yeah, exactly. Right. Death was nothing to be afraid of as long as you left a memory behind.
It's kind of like your bank account before you go out.
Yeah, you're right. You bank up enough savings in human memory, and then you will live on forever, right? This is we see this scene where Gilgamesh is offering objects to these various underworld gods, right, for Enkidu's use. This was one of the reasons you wanted people to remember you, right? If no one remembered you, then you wouldn't have stuff to use in the underworld. Now, the underworld was still going to suck, right? It was still going to be lousy. This is one thing that just about all ancient world religions have in common, right? Death is boring. There is no good afterlife. Right? If we look at Enkidu's description of the underworld in Tablet 7, on page 131. Holding me fast, he took me down to the house of shadows, the dwelling of hell, to the house whence none who enters comes forth, on the road from which there is no way back, to the house whose dwellers are deprived of light. where dust is their fare and their food is clay. They are dressed like birds in feather garments. Yea, they shall see no daylight, for they abide in darkness. Dust lies thick on the door and bolts. When I entered into that house of dust, I saw crowns in a heap. There dwelt the kings, the crowned heads who once ruled the land, who always set out roast meat for Anu and Enlil, who always set out baked offerings, libated cool water from waterskins. In that house of dust I entered, dwelt high priests and acolytes, dwelt reciters of spells and ecstatics, dwelt the anointers of the great gods, dwelt old King Etana and the god of the beasts, dwelt the queen of the netherworld, Ereshkigal. So he comes down into the underworld, he comes down to the world of the dead, and what does he see there? Does your earthly status matter at all here? No, all the crowns are piled in the heap. Kings, high priests, beggars, they all get the same afterlife. It doesn't matter if you were good or bad. It doesn't matter if you anointed the statues of the gods and offered sacrifices, right? That doesn't help you get a better afterlife. What that does do is prevent the gods from murdering your people. So praising the gods really only matters in the world above. Right? You do it in the world above to get things in this world, because it doesn't actually help you in the world below. Nothing really helps you that much in the world below. And so this is terrifying to someone like Gilgamesh, right? He's a man of action. He loves performing heroic feats, racking up glory, having people praise his name. And so, once Enkidu dies, he throws off his clothes, puts on animal skins, and goes running around in the steppe where Enkidu was first found, right? So we see a reversal of that civilizing process. Gilgamesh, civilized man, turns into beast man. And when he encounters people, when he is still in this sort of beast-like state, what is his usual first impulse? When he encounters the tavern keeper, when he encounters Urshanabi the boatman, how does he behave?
He's a barbarian.
Yeah. Yeah, he draws his weapons and threatens them, right? He smashes Urshanabi's stone charms for no reason. Because he's not reasoning, right? He's not thinking. He's acting solely on instinct. And what he needs to learn by traveling to Utanapishtim's island, right, is how to be human again. And how to be a better human, how to be more human than he was when he got there. So, if we look at the advice he gets from Siduri the tavern keeper, right, look on page 138. He's told her all about his feelings regarding his friend's death, right? How he watched the worm fall out of the nose. And Siduri tells him, Gilgamesh, wherefore do you wander? The eternal life you are seeking you shall not find. When the gods created mankind, they established death for mankind, and withheld eternal life for themselves. As for you, Gilgamesh, let your stomach be full, always be happy night and day, make every day a delight, night and day play and dance. Your clothes should be clean, your head should be washed, you should bathe in water. Look proudly on the little one holding your hand. Let your mate be always blissful in your loins. This then is the work of mankind, right? So eat, drink, enjoy yourself, right? Have sex with your wife, father children, right? These are the things human beings are supposed to do, right? These are the joys of human life, the pleasures of human life. You're not a god. You might be 2/3 a god, but you can't live forever. So enjoy these fleeting, ephemeral pleasures while you still can. But he still has to go and test this, right? So he goes off to the island of Utnapishtim. What did you... Now, you said that this portion was harder to understand. What made this part of the epic more difficult for you? When he goes to Utnapishtim's island.
Because it wasn't direct action, it was the recitation of another myth.
Yeah, we've got this other myth embedded in the Gilgamesh myth, right?
And
Well-
he's trying to learn a lesson from, or he's supposed to be learning a lesson from that myth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he doesn't believe Utnapishtim either when Utnapishtim essentially repeats what the tavern keeper told him, right? Now, one thing we see when he meets Utnapishtim is what immortality has actually done to this guy. Look at the beginning of Tablet 11. Gilgamesh said to him, to Utnapishtim, the distant one, "As I look upon you, Utnapishtim, your limbs are not different, you are just as I am. Indeed, you are not different at all, you are just as I am. Yet your heart is drained of battle spirit. You lie flat on your back, your arm idle. You then, how did you join the ranks of the gods and find eternal life?" So, if we look at Utnapishtim as a picture of eternal life, how does it look? What does he do?
Nothing.
Yeah, absolutely nothing. He sees no one. Right? He and his wife live alone together on this island. The only person they ever see is this boatman occasionally who comes back and forth. For what purpose, who knows? They don't really get any visitors. And he's lying there just getting flabby and weak. The implication here, right, is that human beings require action. If we don't have any reason to act, then we decay, we fall apart. We're seeing in Utnapishtim a kind of living physical decay. He doesn't have to die, great, but there's really nothing for him to do or to look forward to.
There's no purpose for him.
Yeah. And the flood myth that we get here is an explanation for Utnapishtim's state, right? Essentially, he became immortal through tricking most of the gods with the help of a god who's generally friendly to human beings. Right, now what did you make of this flood story? What did you think of the flood story? Yeah, Bianca.
It's just like the Noah's Ark story.
It's similar in a lot of respects, yeah, to the Noah story from Genesis. There are some differences here, though, right? In the story in Genesis, is there a reason given for the flood?
Yeah, because they didn't follow the word of God.
Yeah, the people have strayed, and so we will flood everything and drown everyone except for this one guy and a bunch of animals, right? That he puts on a giant boat. Is there any motive ascribed to the gods in this version? Yeah. They don't need a reason, right?
I mean, technically, with the additional text that we've learned from the Bible that's not canonized,
Mm-hmm.
the God flooded the earth because of giants that he was wanting to get rid of.
The giants are actually kind of, I think, yeah, you're talking about stuff that's in like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, like these sort of, yeah, apocryphal texts.
They found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that they haven't, like, no one's canonized it.
Yeah, well, and a lot of that is because they don't really know, they're suspicious of the provenance of some of those texts. They don't know who wrote them or where they came from. and some of them describe traditions that aren't discussed anywhere else. So I wouldn't put too much stock in the drowning the giants thing. I think that sounds to me more like an explanation after the fact. That's someone invented a bit later. And I think most of the historical evidence on that particular line of reasoning backs that up. But in this case, the gods have no reason really for drowning human beings. They just feel like it. This is the sort of thing that the Mesopotamian gods do, right? We've already established they're capricious and cruel, and they do what they feel like. Yeah, Harley.
So what was the reason for what God told them? Was it
Ea, right?
that one?
Ea.
What was the reason for helping them in getting eternal life?
Well, he doesn't really need a reason either, right? There are a couple of characteristics that make Ea the likely helper of humanity in this particular myth. One is that he's generally friendly to humans.
Is that the same one that helped the other guy?
Shamash is the other helpful god. The sun god is the one that helped them earlier. Shamash is also generally friendly to humans. And there may be an earlier version of this myth in which Shamash is the helper god and not Ea. But the other thing that makes Ea appropriate for this myth is that he is also a river god. In fact, usually you can recognize him if you see him in like Mesopotamian iconography. He usually has waterfalls flowing off of his shoulders. That's how he's usually depicted. And he's a trickster god.
Like Loki.
Like Loki, but generally benevolent. So he likes the idea of getting one over on other gods. Are there other things here you see that are different from the Genesis myth? For example, who does Utanapishtim take on his boat? Is it just animals and his family he takes on his boat?
He takes stuff too,
Mm-hmm.
like the stuff to make life enjoyable.
Yeah, he takes wealth, he takes stuff to make life enjoyable, and he takes people as well, right? He also takes aboard skilled craftsmen. So essentially, he takes aboard everything that will allow civilization to start over once the rains stop.
Isn't it a squirrel or a fish that tells them to do this, or is that different?
That's a different. In this one, it's the reed wall. Ea talking through the reed wall. I think the fish is in the Indian flood myth. And these flood myths, we see this particular trope recur across a number of different cultures. Right. Most cultures that are old enough have some version of a flood myth. And it's not necessarily through cultural transmission either, because cultures that are completely unrelated to each other.
That's because
Have flood myths.
civilizations start by a river, and rivers flood.
Yeah,
That's why everyone has a flood myth.
yeah. And we find also that most of them have water as an essential element in their creation myth, right? If we think back to that Mesopotamian creation myth we looked at, how are the gods first created, right? The mingling of the sweet and bitter waters. And yeah, this is also largely based on the fact that civilizations tend to start near rivers.
All 5 classic civilizations do.
Yeah.
Well, it's totally appropriate too, because what you were saying about bats and that indicating change,
Mhm.
it's like a giant change for the
Yeah.
whole civilization.
This is giving the whole damn world a bath.
Yeah.
And everything changes afterwards. Everything is different when the bath is over. And Utanapishtim, because he's part of that old world, is now no longer permitted to live among human beings, right? So he has to be set off on this little island where he becomes like the gods, but without really any of the privileges.
Seems so useless.
Well, and that's part of the point. He is useless.
It's kind of like a form of punishment for living.
Yeah. Yeah. Surviving the flood and something for him really isn't a reward. And I think that's part of the point of the flood myth here. Is that, gaining immortality in this particular way, gaining immortality at all, for a human being isn't actually good for you. Now, Gilgamesh does not have the option of surviving a massive flood, right? Because the birth goddess has put her necklace in the sky as a sign they're not going to do this again, to say, we're sorry. A little hasty there, weren't thinking. Yeah. Does that also look familiar?
The rainbow.
Exactly. So yeah, the rainbow. The same thing we see. It's God placing his bow at the sky at the end of the Noah story. Say, I promise I'll never destroy you again by water. Reserving the right, of course, to use other means. So what is Gilgamesh supposed to do to prove he's worthy of immortality?
Isn't it the sleep thing?
The sleep thing, yes. He is told that he needs to stay awake. All right, page 148. Come, try not to sleep for 6 days and 7 nights. As he sat there on his haunches, sleep was swirling over him like a mist. Uttanapishtim said to his wife, behold this fellow who seeks eternal life. Sleep swirls over him like a mist. Look at this idiot. He wants to live forever, and he can't even keep himself awake for a week. Right? Sleep being here like a form of mock death. If you have to sleep, this shows that you are made of mortal stuff.
So gods in this world don't sleep ever?
Nope, don't need to. Why would they?
Like Zeus slept?
That's a different cultural tradition. But if Zeus sleeps, it's because he wants to, not because he needs to.
Gotcha.
Right, so yeah, gods don't need to sleep.
Is it considered like a sign of weakness?
Pardon?
Is it considered something like a sign of weakness?
I don't know that it would be a sign of weakness so much as simply a sign of mortality. Right?
Indirectly be a sign of weakness.
Well, Uttanapishtim is immortal and he's pretty weak, right? Gilgamesh is mortal. And when he's not, running around the steppe dressed in animal skins crying, he's pretty strong. So immortality and strength are not necessarily connected here, right? Immortality is appropriate for the gods and inappropriate for human beings. Mortality and its features are inappropriate for the gods and appropriate for human beings. And it doesn't have too much to do with relative strength or weakness.
Kind of like X-Men and stuff like that, right?
Pardon?
It's kind of like X-Men and stuff like that, like with the humans and the other people who transform to everything else. It's kind of like that, right?
Yeah, essentially, Gilgamesh is sort of like a superpowered human, right? He's incredibly good looking, incredibly strong, smarter than most people, right? So yeah, he is very much like a comic book superhero. But I would say comic book superheroes can be killed, but then usually when they are killed, they come back 7 or 8 issues later. So maybe they can't. They rarely do stay dead. And some comic book superheroes are legitimate gods, with Thor, for example. But not to belabor that particular point or example, Gilgamesh is this kind of superpowered human being. And why is it significant? Why does it matter that they record his sleep by leaving these decaying bread loaves out, one for each day?
So that you can see that he's mortal.
Yeah, you watch the process of decay, right? Much like he did with Enkidu. Mortal things decay, mortal things rot. And how is bread connected to humanity?
The food of the people, like
Yeah,
God's
this is,
something to eat, isn't it?
yep, human food, basis of civilization, right? What the gods eat is smoke and savor from sacrifices. Gods don't eat bread. They don't eat bread. They probably don't really need to eat anything. Human beings eat bread. So the bread is emblematic of mortality in those two ways. Right, one, it's a thing that decays and that we can watch decay. And two, it is sort of the basis of civilization, sort of the basis of human life, human food.
I don't feel like he chooses him. Like if I was wanting immortality,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would have chosen someone else to try to go to.
Well, he chooses him because he's the only human being who's ever done it.
I guess, but wouldn't it be better to like ask the gods? Like
What's
find
Gil-
a way to.
What's Gilgamesh's relationship with the gods like?
I mean, probably not that good, but maybe he could like negotiate with them or something.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, if he's trying to trick the gods, you can't exactly ask them beforehand. It's like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm trying to trick you into being immortal. Like, how do I do that?
Yeah, and trickery also isn't really Gilgamesh's style, right? I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, he may be a dick, but he's not a liar. Right? He's pretty straightforward about who he is and what he wants. Right? He's not like, how many, we're going to be looking at the Odyssey a little bit. How many are familiar with the Odyssey at all?
Unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. But, right, Odysseus, right, is a clever hero, right? Odysseus is a trickster hero. He makes his way in the world mostly using his wits, mostly by getting one over on people who are less clever than he is. Gilgamesh doesn't work that way. Gilgamesh is more like Achilles is in the Iliad, right? When something gets in Achilles' way, he hits it until it goes away. Gilgamesh kind of works the same way. Right? He doesn't need to be a clever trickster if he's just, inhumanly strong and nearly invulnerable. But the whole idea here, right, the whole thing that Utanapishtim is trying to bring home to him, right, is, right, you are, whether you like it or not, a human being. This is what you are. That 1/3 human part of you is really the most important part. Those 2/3 divine parts, well, that's nice and all. They give you your strength and your beauty, but the world that you live in, the world you belong in, is the human world. And if we look at the very end of the epic, what do we see happen here at the very end? Right? Couldn't stay awake, lost his chance of immortality. Pardon? Heard somebody say something. So Gilgamesh couldn't stay awake. He lost his chance at immortality. Utanapishtim tells him to take a bath, sends him home. And what's the last thing he does?
Have the god count the city?
Yeah. He looks with pride upon his city, right? At 20 double leagues, they took a bite to eat. At 30 double leagues, they made their camp. When they arrived and ramparted Uruk, Gilgamesh said to him, to Urshanabi the boatman, "Go up, Urshanabi, pace out the walls of Uruk. Study the foundation terrace and examine the brickwork. Is not its masonry of kiln-fired brick? And did not 7 masters lay its foundations? 1 square mile of city, 1 square mile of gardens, 1 square mile of clay pits, a half square mile of Ishtar's dwelling. 3.5 square miles is the measure of Uruk." Now, 3.5 square miles may not seem like all that much to us, but for an ancient world city that's actually pretty damn huge. But what's the basic point of this? Why is he now pointing out to Urshanabi everything that's so great about his city?
Because he finally realized that it's okay to be human and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's okay to take pleasure in human things. That's what a mortal being is meant to do. And what else does it indicate about a change? What other change is taking place here in Gilgamesh? What has he not cared about?
He's finally become the proper king figure.
Yeah, he's actually concerned now with his responsibilities as king, right? Look at the walls, right? The walls that protect my people, right? Look at these, clay pits from which we draw the material we make our buildings from, right? Look at, the dwelling of the goddess here, right? This beautiful temple that we built, right? This is my city. This is the city I rule. And now that my chance at immortality is gone, I realize that I'm supposed to care about it.
Yeah,
Right.
what good is it now?
Pardon?
What good is it now?
Well, he's not dead.
Well, right, but like,
There's certainly the opportunity for him now.
but I mean, he's
To
kind of
rule
already
the city.
screwed up the whole mate situation. So like, one of the essential parts of being human, he's just not going to experience.
People get married when they're old all the time.
I know,
Yeah.
but you think that she's gonna be like, she tried to kill him.
Well, yeah, so he's not gonna marry Ishtar.
Yeah. He can still marry someone else. Yes, that's
So does he
That's
live
true.
longer because he's 2/3
because he's a
God?
demigod. Yeah, probably. Unless he dies by violence. But yeah, I mean, usually demigods in mythology live these kinds of comparatively long, charmed lives. They do have to die, but they live longer than other people, with the exception of Achilles in the Iliad, who gets to choose between having a short, glorious life or a long, uneventful one. And he goes for short and glorious. But yeah, a demigod would typically live longer. Now, the other thing about this final passage at the end of the epic, where does this take us back to?
The very beginning, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I was talking about the city of,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes us full circle back to the beginning here. All right, page 99. He who saw the wellspring, the foundations of the land, who knew the ways, was wise in all things. Gilgamesh, who saw the wellspring, the foundations of the land, he knew the ways, was wise in all things. He it was who inspected holy places everywhere. Full understanding of it all he gained. He saw what was secret and what was hidden. He brought back tidings from before the flood. From a distant journey came home, weary at peace, and graved all his hardships on a monument of stone. He built the walls of ramparted Uruk, the lustrous treasury of Halodiana. See its upper wall, whose facing gleams like copper, and so on and so forth. Yeah, Darlene.
So when he was trying to stay awake and he was watching the bread decompose,
Uh-huh.
would that be like a symbol of like fasting and how fasting is supposed to like revitalize you, and then he like finally it all clicks after he does that?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I've never really thought of fasting as something that revitalizes you.
Well, like
But,
they say, you're supposed to do that for like spiritual.
Okay, right. There are people who do spiritual fasts
Yeah.
to purify themselves for various religious purposes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So would that be like a symbol of that? Since after he does that is when everything clicks for him, kind of like the flood.
Right.
Is a bath.
Well, I think
I don't think fasting would have been something the ancient Sumerians or any ancient people actually would have done by choice.
Yeah,
There's quite a lot of starving going on.
Yeah, but abstinence wasn't really a value that these people held. Most ancient world civilizations actually value indulgence more than they value abstaining from anything.
Well, yeah, 'cause that showed that you were rich enough to indulge.
Exactly. And, those who indulge are more likely to survive. Right? Those who don't have the means to indulge are probably going to die earlier. So, Yeah, I think that that's an interesting read on that, but I think that the cultural circumstances suggest that there's no purposeful fast there.
That's not relevant at that point
He
in time.
yeah he just happens to fall asleep, and while he sleeps, the bread decays. So yeah, the not eating thing wasn't really a thing they did.
I'm just confused how long he stayed awake though.
Well, he didn't. That's
I mean-
part of the point. Utanapishtim tells him
To
stay
stay
awake for a week, and Gilgamesh immediately falls asleep. Right, so he proves immediately that he is not up for immortality.
You had to have fallen asleep for quite some time if the bread's decaying.
Mhm.
It takes a couple of days for bread to even start decaying.
Yeah, well, this is also bread with no preservatives
Sure.
in a hot climate. So, and I think maybe attaching too much literal significance to time is the basic point is that Gilgamesh falls asleep immediately, and thus demonstrates his mortal weakness, right? That he is not fit to live like a god, and that's all right. Right? There are other things for him. And the whole point of the epic is to get him to discover those other things he's supposed to care about. Right? Everything up to that point is just getting us to the praise of the city that he repeats at the end of the epic. Right? Because the attitudes that are put in the mouth of the narrator at the beginning of the epic, these bear very little resemblance to the Gilgamesh we see immediately afterwards, right? We don't think of the Gilgamesh who appears immediately after this little prologue as someone who is wise, or who cares about inspecting the holy places, or who knows, what is best in life, right? That's all stuff that comes after he's gone off to Utanapishtim's island and relearned humanity and learned responsibility, essentially, right? Okay, we're about out of time. But yeah, Kayla, go ahead.
I just have a question. Can you explain the part where Enkidu is talking to the door on page 128?
Okay, yeah. The door. On the one hand, remember where Enkidu and Gilgamesh met.
In the doorway?
Yep, in a doorway. Right, and had Enkidu and Gilgamesh never met, Enkidu wouldn't be forced to die, right? He could still be running around the steppe, drinking fresh water with the animals and breaking the hunter's snares. And, living it up the way he was. A door is also what they made out of the cedar trees they took from Humbaba, right? So these doors, like Enkidu, is, he's the man who blocks the door. And I think part of the cursing of the doors is that, Enkidu is the thing that stands in Gilgamesh's way. He's one of the things that stands in Gilgamesh's way from actually becoming a good king and caring about his people. We don't really have time for me to give you a better answer than that, but that is actually a really good. That's a good catch, and it's something that is worth thinking about, and maybe worth developing a paper idea around. So I have some guide questions for you for next time. We're going to be looking at some selections from the book of Genesis, and I do just want to note, right, that I have no intention of trying to shake anyone's deeply held religious beliefs, right? But we are not going to be looking at this from a religious perspective. We're going to be looking at it from a literary mythological perspective, right? So we're going to be examining the book of Genesis in the context of other Near Eastern mythologies. Right? I intend to treat the material respectfully. Right? I'm not trying to offend anyone, but if this is something that you have a problem with or that is going to be troubling for you, right, let me know, okay? All right. That's all we have for you. See you on Thursday.